You've really known some of the big movers and shakers in history. You've known just about everybody that's really worth knowing.
Well, I seem to be guided to them, and when I meet them, we hit it off. Like people like H.L. Hunt and Ezra Pound, I've associated with them years, and we never disagreed about anything. It was a total meeting of the minds.
You actually worked for Hunt for years, right?
I wrote 3 books with him.
And you knew Joe McCarthy?
And Joe McCarthy. I did the critical work for Joe McCarthy. I did a special 24-page report from the Library of Congress, which identified the source of communism, not as the little Jewish shoemakers, which Congress claimed they were, but as the international bankers, the Rothschilds. And you see, communism itself was anti-capitalist. Supposedly you had capitalism and communism. And the Rothschilds financed both parties.
So much for that. Huh?
Yeah.
Now, you also broke the original story on the Federal Reserve. That's quite a detective story. And you did that through your acquaintanceship with Ezra Pound, right?
Well, not only, it was not merely an acquaintanceship. You see, I had become Ezra Pound's legs. He was in prison for life without trial in a mental institution, and he couldn't go out to the library and get books. And when I came to visit him, he said, go to the Library of Congress and see what you could find about the Federal Reserve System. And of course, at that time, I had never heard of the Federal Reserve System, like most Americans. And so I went to the library about this esoteric subject, and I found the whole world opened up. And I came back and showed Ezra what I found out, and he said, you've got to write this as a detective story.
And that was the original breakthrough on exposing the Federal Reserve. And then,
oh, there's 18 copies of my book floating around now under different names, and it's all my work.
And all they do is change the author. They don't even bother to change the text.
Well, some of them have even printed it with my name on it.
Oh,
well, it gives it more authenticity.
And so you were originally born in Roanoke, Virginia.
Yeah.
And after when Churchill got into the hands of the Jews, it was when he was living at Chequers, right? And he got into a big debt, and he was going to lose the Chequers. Why don't you tell us that story, how the Jews...
He was totally wiped out, and he was going to lose the family estate. Of course, Winston Churchill was a poor relation. You see, his ancestor, the Duke of Marlborough, Churchill, had become very wealthy by betraying the nation of England during a war, and betraying them to William of Orange, and that's how William of Orange became King of England, and that's when he set up the Bank of England in 1694, the first central bank. And that's the Bank of England, as a central bank, took over the entire world. We talk about the British Empire, it's actually the Bank of England Empire.
Let's go back to the Federal Reserve System. The people that Felix Warburg was sent over here from Germany, right, by the Rothschilds to set it up, right?
He had been an apprentice in the House of Rothschild, and so as a young rising star, he was sent to the United States to form the most important... See, part of the mythology of the Rothschilds is that they missed out on investing in America, and in fact, they were totally controlled America through 2 firms. One was called Kuhn Loeb, and one is called J.P. Morgan Company. And they were subsidiaries of the House of Rothschild.
I think Loeb, if you wanted to do business with Jew bankers, you would use Loeb. And
that was well known in Wall Street.
And then if you wanted to do business with Christians, you did, what, was it J.P. Morgan?
J.P. Morgan.
Which was really another...
And it was all the same outfit. But that's the way the Rothschilds operated. They were masters of disguise and subterfuge. And so if you were a Christian millionaire in New York, you put your money with J.P. Morgan. And if you were Jewish, well, you'd put your money with Kuhn Loeb. And they all thought they were so secure because my money is with my own people.
Right. So Warburg, it took him how long when he came over here? I understand he had a huge salary in those days. Of
$50,000 a year, which is like $50 million a year.
Yeah. And it took him, a couple of years behind the scenes to get the meeting at Jekyll Island. Why don't you tell him about that?
Well, he didn't... the real mastermind of the meeting at Jekyll Island was John D. Rockefeller.
Oh.
You see, John D. Rockefeller, with the Standard Oil Company, had become the greatest monopoly in the world and the greatest corporation in the world because the Rothschilds, again, had financed the entire expansion. He was a $10 a week clerk in a little office in Cleveland, Ohio. And this $10 a week clerk became the richest man in the world. So you want to know how it's done while you ally with the Rothschilds, and the next thing you know, they're right, this man is the richest man in the world.
Well, the Rothschilds are still exerting their influence because he snapped his fingers, and Warren Buffett and the governor of California came over, and they were seen at his estate. Did you know Warren Buffett probably represents the Rothschilds here?
Oh, he represents the Rothschilds, and I'm told that Warren Buffett has been a very powerful influence in the CIA. So he would be on all the drug smugglers. The same with George Bush. You're in on the drug smuggling, and you're in on the covert operations of the CIA. They have a black budget. Nobody knows how much money they have or who gets it. It's a wonderful way to do business.
Didn't you?
The Chinese people wanted to get out of the influence of drugs and to keep the people from smoking opium all the time. And so they were cleaning it up, and the British Empire came in and forced the drug trade to continue and killed off the Chinese royal family who tried to help their own people and to free their own people from the influence of drugs. And they killed them all, and they sailed right ahead and made more money than ever.
And didn't some of America's wealthiest families, weren't they part of that trade too?
Well, I can give you one name. Frederick A. Delano became the biggest opium dealer in Hong Kong. And he was American, he wasn't British. And with the fortune that he made, the Roosevelts were a ne'er-do-well family, and they weren't making any money. But the Roosevelt girl married Delano's son and became the father of Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
That's a little history we never learned in the history books.
Well, you're not going to find it anywhere in the world because you're only going to hear it from me. I don't have any monopoly on it. I have no copyright. You can quote it as much as you want. But right now, I'm the only person that tells you about that.
I know you are an authority on how the Rothschilds got started.
I really am.
And how, with the loan, why don't you go into that?
Well,
was it King?
The Rothschilds became the richest family in the world through the courtesy of the American government. And the reason that happened was when the Americans, colonists, struck out for independence, King George III realized he could not trust his own troops to fight the colonists because they were all cousins, you know.
Right.
I mean, how do you have people in British troops come to the United States, or the America at that time, and start shooting down their cousins? So he went to he asked around in Europe, well, where can I get some reliable troops? And they said, well, go to the Hessians in Europe. And so he went to Germany and talked to the Elector of Hesse, and the financial manager of the Elector of Hesse, who was then the richest man in Europe, was Amschel Mayer Rothschild. And so Amschel Mayer Rothschild arranged for the sum of about £5 million at that time to rent soldiers to the King George III. And that £5 million became the basis of the entire Rothschild fortune because the Elector of Hesse, of course, turned to Amschel Rothschild and said, invest this money for me. And a couple of years later, Amschel Mayer Rothschild came back and his money had multiplied from £5 million to £25 million. So, of course, that went all over Europe. If you want to get rich, let the Rothschilds invest your money. So they all flocked to the Rothschilds.
But didn't Rothschild actually make like $50 million, and he only gave the Elector 25?
Oh, because when you get in on the ground floor of a new company or a new country or something like that, £1 million becomes £100 million in a couple of years, and that's what happened. Because they had the inside track everywhere, and he invested the money, and but the Elector of Hesse was overwhelmed that he suddenly was worth £25 million. And he was already very rich anyway. These people had palaces. They live like nobody lives in the United States today. I mean, the Rockefellers, they have a little house on the banks of the Hudson in New York. The house of the Rockefeller Mansion in New York would only be a carriage house in any
Rothschild place.
Any aristocratic family in Europe.
They have different tiers, you said, on one of your tapes, one of your talks. They have the different levels of the hierarchy. You've got the
much so.
The food chain or the pecking order is.
Oh, the pecking order is very rigid. It's like the ancient Egypt pharaohs. I mean, you can only move one step at a time. There's no such thing as being promoted over everybody, which Roosevelt himself, he was looking for a stooge in World War II.